having the history of your family is really important. If you can do that, and certainly we want to continue to do that. We've been fortunate in the Haley family to be able to trace our ancestry, as you probably know now, back to its African roots. Now 9 generations. I'm a part of the 7th generation, and we have 2 since. And I certainly would encourage all of you to try and explore ways in which to learn more about your family. Sometimes you have some surprises. Sometimes they are good ones, and sometimes not. But it's really, really good to find out what has happened in your families, and then, of course, to use those experiences for your own benefit, for the benefit of the status of your family, the peers now, but having others who may go on in the future looking at what this family has been.
We tend to learn mostly from people who we care about and who we admire. I think that's one of the things that's important about family history.
My father was a very kind, gentle person, a man that had only an 8th grade education, but rose to prominence in our community. I remember as a young boy, professional people coming to him all the time and asking him for advice and for help in one way or another. He was a man that had great wisdom and even tempered. He was obviously a hard worker, and because he had to support all those kids during the Depression and after. So he was just a man that had a lot of great characteristics about him that you admired.
My father was a very kind, generous man. He was loved in our community for the good that he did. As he ran the grocery store, there were many times that people needed extra food. He was very generous about that. I knew that became a part of me. It was a part of my name to be someone who watched for the needs of others. And that was a great lesson I learned from him.
Sometimes we learn lessons from people a long time ago because they wrote them down. One of the pieces of my family history that I'm most grateful for are a couple of volumes that look like this, that a relative took the time to ask members of their family to write their family history and to write some things about them. And there are literally a couple of thousand pages of stories just about everyday people in their lives, but there are nuggets of things here that are really wonderful nuggets. One of them comes from my great-grandfather. He was an early settler, early pioneer, and he was living in this very remote area that was essentially settled by Indians or inhabited by Indians. And he had been working to form a relationship with them that would allow the settlement to prosper, and so they could have good relationships with their neighbors. He had sent his son out to trade a horse for some Indian blankets. And when his son came back, his son had about 3 times the number of Indian blankets that anyone would expect to get for a horse. And he described how he worried about the fact that he had the better of the deal and that it would harm his relationship with this Indian chief who his son had been trading with. So he said to his son, I want you to go back and to tell the chief that this horse wasn't worth that many Indian blankets and give them some of them back. Well, his son protested, but he insisted that he go. When he got back, the son still didn't understand the significance of it, but days later, the Indian chief came to his house and said, I wanted you to know that I knew that your son had asked for too many blankets, but I knew that you wouldn't allow that to stand, and I just wanted to see if you were in fact an honest man, and you are, and I appreciate that. That was dealing with an early pioneer and an Indian chief. I'm in public service right now, I deal a lot with foreign diplomats, and I'm often in a situation where we're trying to get along with someone from a different country in ways to be good friends with them. When I remember that story, I remember that the most important thing in a good relationship is to be fair, and that when you're striking a deal and a bargain, it's not about taking advantage of someone. It's about finding the place where you can both be happy. I learned that from a family history that my great-great-grandfather wrote years ago.
My family. Dad expected us to do very well. From the standpoint of he gave what he had, you see, and certainly my mother and stepmother did to that extent. So they expect me to use what they have given me to make a better life.
My father was so totally honest that white lies did not exist. You're either honest or you're dishonest. And to illustrate that point, I'll never forget on a Saturday morning when I was a young teenager, the phone rang and I said, "Dad, if that's my friend Bill, tell him that I'm not home because I don't want to talk to him until Monday." And he answered the phone. He said, "Oh, yeah, Jake's right here, Bill." And after the phone conversation, I said, "Dad, why didn't you tell him I wasn't home?" He said, "Because you were home, son. Do you understand?"
I remember well another example of service that I learned from my own father, and that was shortly after he was diagnosed with cancer. And all of us found ourselves immediately in a very uncertain environment. We didn't know what the future would hold for him. Gladly, it was a cancer that they were able to deal with. But the day after he was diagnosed with cancer, I'll never forget what we did as a family. He packed everybody in the car, and we decided we would go out and make a contribution to those who were most in need, which I think for him was a way of taking his mind off his own immediate selfish concerns of having just been diagnosed with cancer. And we took a contribution, a financial contribution, into the homeless shelter. And I'll never forget that day as long as I live, where we walked in the office of the director of the homeless shelter and gave him a check that I think he'll long remember. And it was certainly a lesson to me that I've carried with me through life from my own father, very similar to what I learned from my grandfathers as well. And that was not only talking about service and helping others, but in fact doing something about it.
I know the first real experience I had from the standpoint of God was with my mother's death. She died when I was 6, and I could not understand that at all. Everybody was saying, I was asked, why did my mother die? Nobody else has seemed to have passed out and all. And my dad and grandmother and others were saying, well, she's gone to live with God. Questions, but in spite of that, the faith was beginning to build at that point, with my grandmother being there, with my father and others. I have learned, as we all grow up, that if you get the foundation, as she had given us, then of course it grows. There's so many things that I've seen in my life because of Grandma and others that make me have the faith that I have in God now. But it's because of her that this has happened.